He never looked at her, not once in 8 months, not when she handed him the files he needed, not when she stayed late, fixing mistakes that were not hers, not when the whole floor held its breath every time he crossed through it. She had learned to make herself small enough to pass through rooms like weather, noticed only when something went wrong. That changed on a Tuesday in February when a man named Owen Briggs leaned against her desk and made her laugh so loudly it carried through a closed door. Maybe you know what it is to love someone quietly, to do it so long and so carefully that the wanting starts to feel less like a wound and more like furniture, something you step around without thinking, something you stop expecting anyone else to see. This story starts in a building that looks honest from the street. The Renner Group occupied the top 4 floors of a glass tower on Bay Street in Toronto, the kind of building where the elevators ran silently and the carpet was thick enough to muffle footsteps and ambition, both. On paper, it was a real estate development firm with interests in commercial properties across Ontario and Quebec, the kind of company that sponsored arts galas and kept lawyers on speed dial and smiled in photographs with city councillors. Off paper, the Renner Group was something older and less patient, with roots in freight access, construction contracts, and the particular kind of influence that did not need to advertise itself. Celia Marsh arrived at 7:20 every morning. She liked the city before it decided what it wanted to be for the day, before the commuters thickened and the coffee shops filled and everyone agreed wordlessly to pretend the world ran on ambition alone. At that hour, the floor outside Adrian Renner's office belonged to her, and the low hum of the heating system and the view of Lake Ontario going silver in the early light. She was 26 and had grown up learning how to take up less space than she needed, not because anyone had ever said it plainly, just because the people who spoke loudest in her house got the most air, and eventually she had stopped competing. Her mother had worked nights for most of Celia's childhood. Her older brother had been the kind of loud that got scholarships. She had learned to handle things quietly, efficiently, without needing the credit. That particular skill had made her an excellent executive assistant. She wore dark trousers and a pale blouse most mornings, small pearl studs, hair twisted back, the same flat shoes she'd bought 3 years ago and never replaced because they didn't hurt, and she walked enough to care about that. There was nothing in her appearance that asked for anything. Most days that was exactly the point. Her desk sat outside the principal's office on the 38th floor, close enough to the window that on clear days she could see the ferry crossing to the islands. From there, she managed the moving parts of a man's life without ever being acknowledged as the engine. Calls, contracts, board schedules, catering for client meetings, the quiet emergencies that powerful people never wanted to see handled but needed handled nonetheless. For 8 months she had done that work for Adrian Renner. For 8 months he had walked past her desk, the way a man walks past a piece of infrastructure he's grateful for, but never thinks about. It would have been easier if he had been ordinary, or unkind, or ugly in any obvious way, but Adrian Renner was none of those things. He was tall enough that door frames felt relevant when he walked through them. He wore dark suits the way other men wore confidence, automatically without effort. He had gray eyes that were very still, and a way of listening that made people speak more carefully than they intended to. He moved through rooms as if the room already knew he was coming and had made its arrangements. Officially, he ran a real estate development company, valued somewhere in the range of $4 billion. Unofficially, there were things people knew better than to say directly. In elevators, in parking garages, in certain restaurants with private booths, his name carried a weight that numbers alone did not explain. Celia had heard enough in her 8 months to know where to stop paying attention. She never asked questions about it. She did something more dangerous. She noticed everything. By September, she had learned the sound of his footsteps. The particular silence that spread across the floor 30 seconds before he stepped off the elevator, as if the building itself adjusted its posture. She knew he took his coffee black and too hot, that he canceled lunches more than he kept them, that he read contracts from the back page forward and always caught what legal had buried in the middle section. She also knew the exact moment she had stopped thinking of him as just a name on her paycheck. It had been in October during a site visit at a development east of the city. A family had been relocated for the project, standard procedure, compensated, nothing legally complicated, but their youngest daughter had left a drawing behind, A crayon version of the old house with a sun in the corner and a cat in the window. Someone had left it folded on the reception table at the site trailer. Adrian had been moving past it. 2 project managers, a legal team member, a city planning consultant. He had stopped without saying anything, without looking to see who was watching. He had picked up the drawing and taken it with him. Later that day, Celia had seen him on the phone with the relocation coordinator, asking for the family's new address. She had heard him say, "Send it back to them with a note that says it was found and kept safe." Nothing about that should have changed anything. It changed everything. After that, she noticed more than she should have. The way he remembered the names of tradespeople who'd worked with them years ago. The way he never used his position to cut lines or demand things that weren't owed to him. The weariness he carried under his composure, that particular kind of tired that came not from working too hard but from being too aware for too long. She had no right to see any of it clearly. She saw it anyway, and at some point between October and February, in the most private and pointless way possible, she fell in love with him. No one knew, no one would have guessed. She was very good at the particular performance of not wanting things. On the Tuesday that changed everything, the floor was already awake and moving when Owen Briggs appeared. He worked in building security, rotating between floors, someone she'd exchanged elevator small talk with a few times over the months. He was easy in the way some people just are. Broad shoulders, a quick grin, the kind of energy that made rooms feel less formal by existing in them. He stopped at her desk at 8:35 with a paper cup in each hand and a look that suggested he was genuinely pleased about it. "One of those is yours," he said, setting a coffee beside her keyboard. "Dark roast, 2 sugars, splash of oat milk, I checked." Celia looked at the cup. "You checked?" "I asked the woman downstairs, don't be weird about it." She blinked. "I'm not being weird, I'm surprised." "Surprised someone noticed what you drink?" The question landed too accurately for her to answer quickly. She looked at him, and he looked back, not unkind, just honest. Something in that directness, in the simple, ordinary fact of someone paying attention to a small detail about her, cut through her morning in a way she hadn't been prepared for. "Thank you," she said, and meant it more than the words covered. He leaned against the edge of the desk. "You're always here first. I figured someone ought to make that worth something." They talked for 11 minutes, about nothing important. The weather, which had turned, the transit delays, a restaurant that had opened near King Street that he'd been to twice, and recommended with the conviction of someone who had opinions about food and no shame about sharing them. Celia found herself laughing at something he said about the menu, a genuine laugh, the kind that came before she could decide whether to let it. It was not quiet. 32 feet away, the door to Adrian Renner's office was closed but not sealed. He had been in early unusual for him, reviewing the projections for a development south of the city. He had heard the murmur of voices outside, and registered it as background until he hadn't. The laugh did not belong to the office. It was too warm for all that controlled glass and gray stone, too unguarded. He stood before he had decided to, hand resting on the door. He opened it. Celia was mid-sentence when the air on the floor changed. She felt it before she heard it. That particular pressure of a room becoming aware of its own posture. She turned. Adrian stood at the edge of his doorway. He was in his coat, which meant he hadn't been in long, and his eyes were on her. Not past her, not through her, on her, in a way that made standing still feel briefly impossible. Owen straightened almost automatically. Something cold and immediate moved through Adrian before he had a name for it. He looked at Celia. She looked at him. Neither of them said anything for 3 seconds, which was long enough for the whole floor to learn something had shifted. His voice, when it came, was even Miss Marsh. She moved from instinct, reaching for the nearest folder. Her heels sounded too certain on the floor as she crossed the space. Passing Adrian felt like walking too close to something that had decided it was not finished with the current moment. He let her through and closed the door. The office was warmer than the corridor, and quieter, high windows framing the city in pale winter light. She had been in this room hundreds of times. It had never felt quite this specific. "You seem distracted this morning." His voice was neutral. Celia kept her hand steady on the folder. "I have the revised figures for the Lakeshore site if you need them." "I didn't ask about the figures." Heat crept into her face. "Then I'm not sure what you're asking." He had removed his coat and set it across a chair. He came around the front of his desk slowly, and she noticed he hadn't opened his laptop, hadn't picked up his phone. He was simply looking at her. "Jane, you were laughing." "Jane." The observation was so plainly stated it almost made her forget to be careful. "I'm sorry." "Jane." "Don't be." A pause. "I haven't heard that before." "Jane." Celia stared at him. "Jane." 8 months, he said. "You walk into that chair every morning, you run every piece of this office without making a sound, and in all of that time I have never once heard you sound like that." "Jane." She swallowed. "Like what?" "Jane." "Like you weren't managing something." "Jane." The words landed harder than she'd been prepared for. She tried for professional and found only honesty. "Maybe no one gave me a reason to stop." "Jane." Something moved through his expression, complicated and fast and very carefully contained. "Jane." And he did. "Jane." Owen was being kind. She meant it. "Jane." That, Adrian said quietly, is exactly the problem. "Jane." She blinked. "I don't understand why it's a problem at all." "Jane." He took one step, deliberate, not close enough to be inappropriate, close enough to make the room smaller. "Because the first time I actually look at you," he said, "you're looking at someone else like they've already done something right." "Jane." Her pulse knocked hard against her throat. "Jane." He exhaled. Something almost like frustration, almost like recognition, moved across his face before he got hold of it. "You may go." "Jane." The dismissal came fast enough that she stood there for a moment, wondering if she had imagined the previous 2 minutes. She looked down at the folder she was still holding, which she had not opened, and made herself walk. "Jane." Out in the corridor, no one looked up. They didn't need to. "Jane." Celia sat at her desk and opened a file she did not read for 10 minutes. Her hands were steadier than she thought they had any right to be. "Jane." Owen had already gone downstairs. The coffee was still warm. "Jane." She did not sleep much that night. The apartment she rented in a building near Bloor and Spadina was small enough that she could hear the neighbors through the wall when they argued, which they did every 10 days or so with a regularity she had stopped finding distressing. The radiator ticked in the cold. The street below had that wet salt smell that came in February when the city was tired of winter, and winter had not noticed. "Jane." She lay on her back looking at the ceiling and heard him again, quiet and certain. "The first time I actually look at you." "Jane." She told herself it meant nothing. "Jane." She was not convincing. "Jane." When she arrived the next morning, her desk was gone. "Jane." Not moved to a different spot on the floor, not relocated to another office. The space outside Adrian Renner's door where she had sat for 8 months was simply empty. Bare floor. A rectangular absence in the carpet where the chair legs had been. "Jane." She stood at the elevator for a moment, thinking she had walked out on the wrong floor. "Jane." The floor manager appeared with the expression of a man who had been waiting for her and was not enjoying it. "Mrs. Marsh, Mr. Renner has made an adjustment to your workspace." "Jane." She looked at the empty space. "Jane." "To where?" "Jane." He gestured almost apologetically toward the corner office. "Jane." Through the glass she could already see it. A compact desk positioned inside the office itself, to the right of Adrian's, angled so that he would need only to lift his eyes to find her. Her monitor had been moved. Her 2 stacked notebooks were there. Even the small succulent she kept in a green ceramic pot was on the corner of the new surface, as though someone had thought the plant mattered too. "Jane." "He asked that you come in directly," the manager said. "Jane." "Of course he did." "Jane." Every set of eyes on the floor was pretending not to track her. She could feel it the way you feel weather changing. She walked across to the office and knocked. "Jane." "Come in." "Jane." The room smelled faintly of coffee and cold air still clinging to his jacket, which he had hung on the back of the door. He was already at his desk, reading something on a tablet, tie straight, as though he had not rearranged the architecture of her professional life sometime in the last 12 hours. "Jane." "Good morning." He looked up. "Jane." Celia stopped just inside. "Jane." "Yes." "Jane." She waited. He didn't add anything. "Jane." "Why?" "Jane." He set the tablet down. "Because I wanted you in here." "Jane." "That's not a reason." "Jane." "It is to me." "Jane." She looked at the new workstation, the plant, the deliberate familiarity of it all, the way it had been arranged to look considered rather than impulsive. "People will notice." "Jane." "They already have." "Jane." "That doesn't bother you." "Jane." He leaned back, very steady. "I'd prefer it." "Jane." The heat that came into her face was swift and involuntary. She could not find a response that didn't give away something. Sit down, Celia. Ain. Her name said that way, with that tone, sat in the room and took up more space than either of them acknowledged. She sat. The chair was new enough that it moved easily, too smoothly compared to the worn one outside. She could see the edge of his cufflink when he picked up his pen. She could see the slight shadow beneath his eyes that said he hadn't slept enough. She had spent 8 months learning him in fragments. This was something else entirely. All internal scheduling comes through you now, he said, voice shifting into the register of work. Documents reach me only after you've reviewed them. Legal will stop going around you. Anyone who has a concern about that arrangement can bring it directly to me. Celia stared at him. You planned this? Yes. When? His mouth moved, not a smile, something adjacent. Yesterday. She thought about the empty apartment, the ceiling, the words she'd tried to talk herself out of all night. Apparently she'd been too conservative in her doubts. You're going to act like this is normal. For me it is. I had a desk outside yesterday. Now you have one in here. He picked up a contract from the corner of his desk and held it out to her. The port credit application is on top. Signatures needed before noon. Celia took it. She looked at the page and didn't read it. That's not an explanation. No, he met her eyes. It's a decision. She thought about pointing out that those were not the same thing. She thought about several things she could say, all of them reasonable. All of them entirely beside the point, because what he had done was already done, and she was already inside it, and some part of her that she usually kept very quiet was not as unhappy about that as professionalism required. She opened the contract and started reading. Her hands were steadier than yesterday. That surprised her. The day moved strangely. People came into the office with questions, left with more information than they had expected, and went back to the floor with one more thing to add to what was clearly becoming a significant conversation. Celia could feel the reverberations without needing to hear words. Junior staff dropped things off at her new desk with expressions that ranged from carefully neutral to openly curious. 2 senior project managers came in together, realized the arrangement, and adjusted their presentation without comment. By 11, she had settled into the rhythm of it more than she wanted to admit. She caught him looking at her twice. The first time he held her gaze without apology. The second time she held it back. At noon his phone rang and he answered in French. Not the polished second-language French of someone who'd learned it formally, but fast, idiomatic Quebecois in its cadence. The conversation dropped in temperature somewhere around the second minute. His voice stayed level, but the level changed. Something older and colder moving through his tone like ice under moving water. She could not follow all of it. She followed enough. When he hung up, he looked up and found her not looking at her screen. You speak French, he said. High school I catch maybe 60%. Something shifted in his expression. That's more than most people admit. What was that about? He considered her for a moment. Business. It sounded like a threat. Most business does eventually. He looked at her steadily. You're not frightened? It wasn't quite a question. She answered it anyway. Should I be? Probably, he said it flatly. Most people are. She looked back at her screen. You don't seem entertained by that. A silence passed. No, he said quietly, I'm not. Something in that, the tiredness of it, the lack of performance, settled into her chest and did not leave. Lunch arrived on a cart. He told the attendant where to leave it without asking her preference, because apparently they had crossed into a territory where he was making those calls. She almost said something about it. She looked at the food, good food, more than she would have ordered, and sat down at the small table near the windows when he gestured toward the chair across from him. Below them, the city ran its usual midday patterns. Commuters, couriers, people eating sandwiches on the steps of buildings that had not yet decided whether to be offices or condominiums. The lake was flat and pale at the edge of visibility. They ate mostly in silence, not uncomfortable silence, the kind that exists between people who have both decided they're not going to pretend harder than necessary. How many people, Celia said finally, do you think have already built a full narrative about this? All of them. And you genuinely don't care. He poured water into her glass, an entirely ordinary gesture that felt completely unreasonable in context. I spent 8 months walking past you. She set her fork down. That was my mistake. His voice was controlled, but the words underneath it were not. I don't intend to fix a mistake by making a smaller one on top of it. She looked at him across the table. At the hard line of his jaw, the gray of his eyes, the complete stillness of a man who had clearly thought this through and arrived at a conclusion before she'd had a chance to weigh in. You don't know what this is? No, his gaze held hers. So tell me why watching another man make you laugh made me want him reassigned to a different building. The office shrank around that sentence. She looked down. You asked me this morning why it mattered, he said. Now you know. Her fingers tightened around her water glass. That's not fair. No, a pause. Because I've been talking myself out of noticing you for 3 months. The silence that followed had weight to it, real weight, the kind that meant something had been let into the room that could not easily be walked back to the door. His phone buzzed twice on the table. He didn't look at it. Celia made herself meet his eyes. You should have said something. I know. 8 months is a long time to not say something. Yes, the word was simple and she felt the cost of it. He was not a man who apologized easily. She understood enough about him by now to know that what he had just offered was something. A knock at the outer door broke the moment. One of the junior associates came in with a folder and stopped dead at the arrangement of the room. Her eyes moved from Celia to Adrian and back with the speed of someone doing rapid recalibration. The Markham permits, she said carefully. Leave them with Celia, Adrian said without looking up. The woman set them down, produced a very neutral expression and left quickly. Celia looked at the permits, looked at him. You did that on purpose. Yes. Why? Because now everyone knows it's the arrangement. She almost laughed despite herself, which was becoming a habit around him that she was not sure she could afford. You're impossible. Apparently, you can still function around impossible. She was quiet for a moment, then said, the first kind thing you've said to me. It's not the first one. His eyes came to hers. It's the first one you recognized as such. She did not have an answer for that. She looked back at the permits and started reading, and he let her, and neither of them said anything for a long time, which itself felt like a kind of conversation. 3 days later, someone started asking questions downstairs. Mason Cho, Adrian's head of security, delivered the information at the end of the afternoon with the measured calm of a man who understood exactly how his employer wanted things framed. A man came into the lobby at 4:15, visitor parking cash. The company name he gave doesn't register. He was asking about a specific employee on this floor. A pause. By name. Adrian's face did not move. That was the part that told her everything. Her schedule, Mason continued. Whether she comes in alone, what building she lives in. Celia looked at the two of them and understood that the temperature in the room had dropped in a way that had nothing to do with the heating. Security flagged him after he left, Mason said. Image check returned nothing useful. He tried a second approach near the freight entrance before one of our people moved him along. Your people, Celia said, not quite a question. Neither man acknowledged it. Adrian looked at her for a moment. In his eyes she saw the full shape of something she had not let herself think through yet. Not someone curious about office gossip, not a coincidence. Something deliberate, targeted, and not interested in stopping at names. Tell me what this actually means, she said. Mason looked to Adrian. It means, Adrian said, that someone noticed. Noticed what? His jaw tightened once. That you matter to me. The room was very quiet. That's enough to do this? She heard the evenness in her own voice and was surprised by it. In my world, yes. He looked at her directly. There's a family out of Montreal, old interests. They've been looking for soft points of access for a while. They think I'm a soft point. They think you might become one. He stood. They're not wrong about the fact of it. Just about what I'm going to do with that information. Mason set a plain envelope on the desk. No address, no markings. Adrian opened it. He pulled out a photograph. Celia saw herself before she understood what she was looking at, standing outside her building on Bloor the evening before, coat buttoned against the cold hand in her pocket, looking down at her phone. The photo had been taken from across the street. It was close enough to read her face, close enough to know the building number above the door behind her. She stepped back. Oh, she said very quietly. It was all she said. Adrian folded the photograph and placed it face down on the desk with a deliberateness that suggested he was doing it instead of something else. The note, she said. He looked at her. What did it say? Mason answered even and quiet. For a careful man, he has careless habits. Celia absorbed that the sentence was not about her. It was about Adrian, someone telling him very precisely that they had identified the carelessness, that they had found what he had not meant to let them see. She looked at Adrian. He was watching her with the concentrated attention of someone tracking the exact moment a person decides how to feel about a thing. How long have they been watching, she said. I don't know yet. Are they going to try something? Yes, he said it the way he said everything, without cushioning it, which was its own kind of respect. Not if I move first. Celia looked at the face-down photograph on the desk, at her own life reduced to a surveillance image taken under a street lamp she passed every night without registering. What does moving first mean? Adrian came around the desk. Not close, not yet, just reducing the distance. It means you don't go back to that apartment tonight. She looked at him sharply. It means you come with me. He met the resistance in her expression without flinching from it. Not because I'm telling you what to do, because I know what men like this do when they've identified a point of access and no one has closed the door. You're asking me to leave my life. I'm asking you to stay inside a different set of walls until I know who sent this and what they want and how far they've already gone. She searched his face for some trace of impulse or exaggeration. She found neither, just the particular calm of a man who had thought several steps past the conversation he was currently having. I have things there, she said. I'll have them brought. I don't want strangers going through my apartment. Then I'll send Mason. She folded her arms. I won't be treated like I need to be managed. Something shifted in him, not softening exactly. He wasn't built for softening, but the angle of it changed. He looked at her the way he'd looked at the photograph, carefully as though each detail mattered. I know, he said. I'm asking you anyway. The honesty of it reached her in a way that a more polished answer would not have. She looked at the window. Below them the city was going dark in that particular February way, orange streetlights on black ice, windows brightening as the sky dropped out. I'll come, she said, for tonight. He held her gaze. Thank you. She had not expected that either. The house was not what she'd imagined. In the moments she'd let herself imagine anything about how he lived. It was in Rosedale, which she supposed made sense. Old stone, discreet, the kind of house that did not announce itself from the street. Inside it was warmer than the building and less formal. Books in actual shelves, arranged as though they were used. A kitchen that looked like someone cooked in it. A sitting room with 2 chairs angled toward a fireplace that was burning when they arrived, which meant someone had prepared it, which was its own kind of information. He showed her the room at the end of the second hallway. It was large and quiet, with windows that faced the garden, dark now under February snow. A bag was already there. Her things, she realized. Mason had been efficient. She stood in the middle of the room and looked at the ceiling. Dinner in an hour, Adrian said from the doorway. And then, before she could say anything, you don't have to thank me. You can be angry about it instead. She turned. I'm not angry. You are a little, he said it without judgment. You should be. I took a situation and accelerated it without giving you a clean choice. She looked at him. Why are you telling me that? Because it's true. A pause. And because I'm going to keep doing it for as long as I think you're in danger, and it's better if you know that now. She should have been more troubled by that than she was. She went to dinner. They ate at a table by the window with the snow outside, and the sound of the city muffled to almost nothing by the walls and the distance. He took 3 calls, 1 in English, 2 in French, one of which she understood enough to know had involved a threat and a counter-threat that he had delivered in a tone so even it made the threat more credible, not less. When he came back to the table the 3rd time, she looked at him. Is this what every evening is like for you, she said. He sat. Some evenings are worse. Does it get easier? He was quiet for a moment. You stop expecting it to. She looked at her wine glass. That's a terrible answer. Yes, the corner of his mouth moved. It is. She almost smiled, didn't quite. I heard you say something about the photograph before dinner, through the hall. Ain. He looked at her. Ain. I wasn't trying to listen, she said, but I heard enough. Ain. He was still for a moment, then what did you hear? Ain. You said you were going to make it, so they had no reason to use me, that you were going to remove the variable. She met his eyes. I want to know what that means. Ain. He set down his glass. It means making public what they're trying to leverage. Ain. Public how? Ain. If everyone knows who you are to me, he said, the photograph stops being useful. Ain. The sentence moved through her in stages. She sat with it. You'd do that. Ain. I already have. He held her gaze steadily. I told Mason this afternoon. I'll make a few calls tomorrow. By Wednesday, anyone who matters will know. Ain. Anyone who matters, she repeated, in your world. Ain. Yes. Ain. She thought about what that meant, the rooms those calls would reach, the people who would receive the information and understand its implications, the fact that she would become, in some register, she had no real map, for a declared thing. Ain. You could have asked me first. Ain. I could have. His voice did not offer an excuse. I should have. Ain. She looked at him for a long moment, at the weariness and the resolve and the thing underneath both of them that he had been managing since October, probably, since some time before she'd known there was anything to manage. Ain. I'm not going to pretend, she said carefully, that I haven't been in love with you for most of the past 4 months. Ain. He went very still. Ain. I need you to know that's not why I'm agreeing to this, she said. I'm agreeing because the photograph was real and I'm not stupid about what that means. But I wanted you to know the other thing too, before you decide anything else without asking me. Ain. Adrian looked at her across the table. The firelight did something to his face that made him look less certain than she had ever seen him, which was its own kind of terrifying. Ain. 4 months, he said finally. Ain. Give or take. Ain. I've been at it for 3, a pause. You're ahead of me. Ain. She laughed before she could stop it. It came out uneven and real, and she pressed her fingers to her mouth, and he watched her do it with an expression that was not a smile, but was in the same neighborhood. Ain. That's the most human thing you've said to me, she told him. Ain. Don't tell anyone. He reached across the table and his hand covered hers, not dramatically, just there, warm, steady, decided. Celia. Ain. Yeah. Ain. I'm sorry I didn't see you sooner. Ain. She turned her hand over under his. You're seeing me now. Ain. The calls he made on Wednesday were brief. She heard the shape of them through the walls, names she recognized from her 8 months of managing calendars, from the fringes of conversation she had not been meant to understand. Men who controlled things, men who made assessments and then treated those assessments as fact. Ain. By Thursday something had changed in the building. Ain. She returned to work in his car through the private entrance with 2 men she didn't know the names of and wasn't going to ask. The floor adjusted to her in the way. Floors adjust to information that has been distributed and understood. Her desk inside his office was still there. No one questioned it. Ain. One of the account directors who had looked through her for most of 8 months held a door open for her in the hallway and said good morning with a directness that had not been there before. She accepted it and kept walking. Ain. Owen found her at noon, not at her desk. He had clearly learned enough to know the approach needed to be different. He caught her in the hallway near the elevators, coffee in one hand, his expression a careful thing. Ain. You good, he said. Ain. She looked at him. He had kind eyes. He had always had kind eyes. I'm okay. Ain. He nodded slowly. There was something resigned moving behind the question he wasn't asking, and she found she respected him more for not asking it. Ain. I never really stood a chance, did I? He said, not unkindly. Ain. She thought about lying in the comfortable direction. Chose not. Probably not. But for what it's worth, you were the first person in a long time who paid attention to a small thing about me. That mattered. Ain. He absorbed that, nodded once. Take care of yourself, Celia. Ain. You too, Owen. Ain. She meant it. He walked away and she watched him go and felt the particular sadness of a door that closes cleanly without drama, without injury, just a soft click and then the next thing. Ain. A week later, life had rearranged itself into something she did not entirely recognize and could not entirely find fault with. Ain. The apartment on Bloor was still hers. She went back on Saturday morning with Mason at an appropriate distance, and packed a proper bag and stood in the small kitchen for a few minutes listening to the radiator and the street below and the sound of ordinary life continuing at its ordinary pace. She had lived there for 2 years. She had been comfortable there in the way a person can be comfortable in a space that fits their current size, before they grow into a different one. She took the plant from the windowsill. She locked the door. She thought she'd feel more complicated about it than she did. In the Rosedale house, Adrian was at his desk in the study when she got back. He looked up the way he was looking at her constantly. Now, like something in his vision had shifted, and she was where it landed by default. She put the plant on the windowsill in the sitting room, where it would get the afternoon light, and he watched her do it without saying anything. Don't make a thing of it, she said without looking at him. I wasn't. You were about to. He was quiet for a moment. I was going to say it looks good there. She turned. He was smiling, actually smiling, the rare, genuine version that changed the landscape of his face entirely. She had seen it twice before. She thought she could probably spend a long time trying to collect more of them. You look different when you do that, she said. Do what? Smile like you mean it. He stood from the desk and crossed the room to her unhurried. The way he moved through spaces he had already decided were his. He stopped close enough that she had to tip her chin to hold his gaze. You're the only person, he said, who's ever said that to me. She searched his face. Believed it, you mean, or said it? Both. She thought about 8 months of being walked past, about a year of learning someone in fragments, of loving quietly, in the specific way you love things you have decided you cannot have. She thought about a crayon drawing and a small toy car, and all the ways a person could be hiding in plain sight. His hand came up to her jaw the same way it had the first time, that same careful, deliberate tenderness that was so at odds with the rest of him that it kept startling her. I keep thinking, he said, about all the mornings I walked past your desk. Don't. Celia. Don't, she said again, softer. You're here now, that's the part that counts. He looked at her for a long moment. Something in him settled or decided or arrived somewhere it had been traveling toward for a while. When he kissed her this time, there was no urgency in it. Not the way the first time had been, that sudden, necessary thing that happened because restraint had simply run its course. This was slower, patient, the kind of kiss that happened after the emergency had passed, and what remained was just the two of them, and the afternoon light on the plant on the windowsill and the city going on at its ordinary pace outside. She pulled back first just enough to look at him. I need you to actually ask me things, she said. Before you decide them, at least some of the time. Some of the time, he said, and she heard the precision in it, the honesty that didn't promise more than he could deliver. That's acceptable, she said. He kissed her forehead, brief and certain, the kind of contact that assumed continuation. Then he stepped back, returned to his desk, and picked up the report he had been reading. She sat in the chair by the window and opened her own laptop. They worked like that until the sun dropped behind the houses to the west and the room went warm and amber. He made coffee at some point without asking and set a cup beside her, without commentary. She read 3 contracts and flagged 7 items that required his attention and sent the list to his screen, which he opened and read without looking up. You caught the liability clause in the Laval Amendment, he said. It was buried in subsection 4. Our legal team missed it. Your legal team doesn't read from the back. He looked up at her, then that look again. The one that had started somewhere in October with a drawing and a phone call about a family's new address. The one that had been building in the direction of this room and this afternoon for longer than either of them had said out loud. You've been doing that since September, he said, reading from the back. Since October, she said. I was watching you for a month before I started learning your habits. Something in him went still in the way it did before he said something that mattered. What were you watching for? She thought about it honestly, to see if you were worth the noticing. He held her gaze. The city outside had gone fully dark, just the amber of streetlights on snow through the window. And she said you were. He said nothing for a moment. Then he set down his pen, and the quiet that came after was the kind that had already made up its mind about what it was. Not empty, not waiting, just full of the particular weight of 2 people who have finally stopped looking past each other. Outside, Toronto moved in its usual winter dark, cold and busy and indifferent to everything that did not belong to it. But in that room for the first time in 8 months she was not on the other side of a door. She was exactly where she had always been, only now he knew she was there. I think about Celia a lot. Not because her story is unusual, but because it's the kind of story most of us have lived some version of. The part where you show up, do the work, stay quiet, and somehow still manage to disappear inside the very space you're holding together. She wasn't passive. That's the thing people get wrong about women like her. She wasn't waiting to be rescued. She had already built a life that functioned. She paid her own rent, managed another person's entire professional world without missing a step, and loved someone in complete silence for months without letting it make her careless or bitter. That takes a kind of inner steadiness most people don't recognize as strength because it doesn't make noise. What struck me about Adrian wasn't the possessiveness or the power or even the moment he finally looked at her. It was the drawing. The crayon picture of a family's old house that everyone else walked past, and the quiet phone call he made to send it back to them. Nobody was watching, he didn't mention it. He just did it because it was the right thing to do, and then he moved on. That's the kind of character that doesn't announce itself. You have to be paying attention to see it. Celia was paying attention, and I think that matters. The idea that before we ask to be truly seen, we have to be willing to truly see. She looked for the real person underneath the reputation and found something worth the risk. There's a kind of cause and effect running through this story that I keep coming back to. Adrian spent 8 months maintaining distance because he understood what his world cost the people inside it. That wasn't cowardice. That was a man trying to act with some decency toward someone he cared about, even before he fully admitted he cared. The problem wasn't the distance itself. It was that he never told her why. And silence, no matter how well-intentioned, tends to read as indifference to the person on the receiving end of it. What we don't say out loud has consequences just as real as what we do. Owen's coffee mattered, not because it created the situation, but because it revealed it. It takes a certain kind of courage to offer a small kindness to someone you notice is being overlooked. He saw that Celia arrived first every morning and decided that deserved acknowledgement. He was right about that, even if the story moved somewhere he hadn't expected. I think about the people in my own life who did that, who paid attention to a small detail and acted on it, and how much that kind of integrity stays with you. And then there's what Celia did in that dining room. She told the truth, not because the moment demanded it, not because she had nothing to lose, but because she'd decided she wasn't going to let fear of the answer keep her from being honest. That took real courage, the quiet kind, the kind that doesn't look dramatic from the outside but cost you something real on the inside. What I take from all of it is something I'm still learning to apply in my own life, that being overlooked doesn't mean being without value, that showing up with integrity day after day in ways that nobody applauds is not nothing. It's the foundation of who you become, that speaking the truth at the right moment, even when your voice shakes, tends to change things in ways that staying silent never could. And that sometimes the person who finally sees you clearly was standing close enough to reach the whole time.